I never thought a simple conversation with my little brother would lead me down a path I never imagined possible. But life is funny like that. The biggest mistakes don't come crashing in. They slip in quietly, disguised as something harmless, until it's too late. That night, I was in the kitchen, washing dishes. My husband was in the other room, talking about work, like always. I barely heard him. Lately, I felt more like a shadow in my own home. Present, but unseen. Then my little brother walked in. He hesitated at the counter, fingers tapping, eyes shifting. Like he was holding something back. "Can I ask you something?" I turned off the faucet, grabbed a towel. "Of course. What's up?" He took a breath. "I need help with my first time." I froze. My heart skipped just for a second. Simple words. Innocent words. But the air in the room changed. Heavy. Still. I forced a small laugh. "Oh! That's a big step." He nodded, serious. "Yeah. And I trust you. I don't want to mess it up." Trust. That word stuck. It had been a long time since someone looked at me like that. Since someone made me feel needed. Asterisk, that was the moment. The first crack. The first shift. The moment I should have walked away. But I didn't. And what happened next? I still can't believe it. Tell me, have you ever been in a situation where the lines started to blur? Where something innocent suddenly didn't feel so innocent anymore? Let me know in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe for more shocking real-life stories. Because trust me, this is only the beginning. His words stayed with me, even after he left the kitchen. Even after I went to bed, lying beside a man who felt more like a stranger than a husband. The weight of them sat heavy in my chest, pressing against something I hadn't acknowledged in a long time. Trust. I used to have that with Smith. Used to feel safe in his arms, used to have late-night conversations about nothing and everything. But somewhere along the way, life happened. Work. Bills. The slow drift of routine. And before I knew it, we had become two people sharing a house instead of a home. He was always busy. Phone glued to his ear, laptop glowing late into the night. Conversations had turned into passing exchanges. "Did you pay the electric bill? Don't forget to pick up groceries." And intimacy? That had faded long ago, replaced by tired goodnights and the cold side of the bed. I stopped trying after a while. Stopped reaching out, stopped hoping for something different. It was easier that way. But just because I accepted it didn't mean I didn't feel it. The loneliness. The aching need to be seen. To be wanted. And then there was Greg. 19. Still figuring things out. He had always looked up to me. When we were kids, he followed me everywhere, annoying, curious, full of questions. But now, he wasn't a kid anymore. He was growing into himself. Broad shoulders. A deeper voice. Confidence mixed with uncertainty, like he was on the edge of becoming something, but didn't quite know how. He had always come to me for advice. School. Friends. Life. And I never thought twice about it. But that night, something felt different. Maybe because, for the first time in a long time, someone was looking at me like I mattered. Like what I had to say meant something. The house felt smaller after that. Every interaction with Greg seemed heightened. A glance that lingered a second too long. The way his voice softened when he spoke to me. The way I caught myself watching him, noticing things I shouldn't be noticing. And I hated myself for it. I told myself it was nothing. Just my imagination. Just a starving heart mistaking a drop of water for an ocean. But deep down, I knew the truth. I had been alone for too long. And loneliness makes fools of us all. I should have pulled away then. Created distance. Set boundaries. But I didn't. Because for the first time in years, I wasn't invisible. Someone saw me. And that was dangerous. I told myself it was nothing. That the shift in the air was in my head. That I was just reading too much into things because I had been alone for so long. But some things you feel. Even if you don't want to. Even if you try to ignore them. It happened a few nights later. Late evening. The house was quiet, the kind of quiet that settles in when two people live separate lives under the same roof. Smith was in his office, as always, buried in work, probably forgetting I even existed. I sat in the dimly lit living room, curled up on the couch, half watching a show I wasn't really paying attention to. And then Greg walked in. Something about the way he moved caught my attention. Slower than usual. More deliberate. He hesitated near the doorway, rubbing the back of his neck, like he was working up the courage to say something. I muted the TV and looked up at him. "You okay?" He let out a breath, sat down on the other end of the couch. Close, but not too close. Just enough for me to notice. I need to ask you something," he said, eyes locked on his hands. "And I don't know who else to talk to about it." I shifted, turning slightly to face him. "Of course. What's going on?" Another pause. He exhaled sharply. "It's about my first time." A flicker of heat rushed through me, but I ignored it. Pushed it down. I forced a small, knowing smile, trying to keep things light. "Oh, that's okay. That's normal to be nervous about." He nodded, but his shoulders were tense. "Yeah, I don't want to mess it up. I want to make sure I do it right. You know?" And I figured you'd know. Something in the way he said it made my breath catch. My mind scrambled for the right response, something casual, something normal. But suddenly, everything felt too quiet. The space between us felt too charged. "Greg," I started, carefully, trying to keep my voice steady. "That's a personal thing. It's different for everyone. You'll figure it out when the time comes." He let out a frustrated sigh, leaning back against the couch. "I just don't want it to be awkward. I don't want to seem clueless. I mean, I've read stuff, I've heard things, but..." His voice trailed off. His gaze flickered to mine, just for a second, but that second stretched longer than it should have. Something unspoken passed between us. Something I felt in my chest. I swallowed hard, shifting in my seat. It's not about getting it perfect. It's about being with someone you trust. Someone who makes you feel comfortable. His eyes held mine again, searching. There was a pause. Too long. Too heavy. I should have broken it. I should have laughed it off, changed the subject, put up a wall between us. But I didn't. Because for the first time in a long time, someone was looking at me like I mattered. And that was more dangerous than anything else. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, listening to the faint hum of the air conditioner and the steady, rhythmic breathing of Smith beside me. He was turned away, like always, his body curled toward the edge of the bed, as if even in sleep, he was retreating. I used to miss the way he held me at night. The way his arms felt secure around me, the way he used to pull me close, whispering something half asleep that made no sense, but still made me smile. But that was years ago. Now, I couldn't even remember the last time he touched me in a way that didn't feel routine. The last time he kissed me like he meant it. The last time I felt wanted. And yet, for the first time in a long time, I did feel wanted. Not by my husband, but by Greg. The thought made my stomach twist. Shame curled around my ribs, hot and suffocating. This was wrong. It was just a conversation. He was just a kid looking for advice. I was reading into it, making it into something it wasn't. And yet, something about it lingered. The way he looked at me. The way his voice softened when he spoke. The way his presence filled the space in a way Smith's never did anymore. I squeezed my eyes shut, forcing the thoughts away. It wasn't like that. I was overthinking. Loneliness plays tricks on the mind. That's all this was, an illusion created by my own emptiness. But if that was true, why did I feel so alive when Greg was around? The next morning, I tried to push it from my mind. I went through my routine like nothing had changed, made coffee, cleaned up the kitchen, answered a few emails. But the moment Greg walked in, I felt it again. That shift in the air. That unspoken something sitting between us, invisible but undeniable. "Morning," he said, his voice low, still a little rough with sleep. I forced a smile. "Morning." He lingered by the counter, watching me pour my coffee. I could feel his eyes on me, and for some reason, my hands felt unsteady. I turned, meeting his gaze, and for a second, neither of us spoke. I should have said something. Made a joke. Changed the subject. Instead, I cleared my throat and looked away. "About last night," he started. My heart skipped. I tightened my grip on my mug. It's fine, Greg. Really? You don't have to, no, he sighed, rubbing the back of his neck. I just wanted to say thanks. For listening. For not making me feel stupid. Something in his voice tugged at me. Vulnerability. Gratitude. A kind of warmth I hadn't felt in so long. I nodded, forcing a small, reassuring smile. Of course. That's what I'm here for. And that was the problem, wasn't it? I wasn't just here for him. I was here for Smith too. And yet, I couldn't remember the last time he needed me the way Greg did. That thought sank deep, settled into my bones. And no matter how hard I tried to shake it off, it stayed. It didn't stop at that conversation. I told myself it would. That it was a one-time thing. That I had overthought it, let my loneliness twist something innocent into something dangerous. But the days that followed told a different story. Greg started coming to me more often. Little moments. Small questions that didn't seem like much on their own, but together, they built something I wasn't ready to name. It was never anything obvious. Never anything someone else would notice. But I felt it. The shift. The way his eyes lingered when we talked. The way his voice dropped just a little lower when he spoke to me. The way he seemed to need my attention in a way that made my pulse quicken. And worse, the way I started giving it to him. At first, I told myself it was just natural. He was young, he was curious, and I was the only one he felt comfortable enough to talk to. That's all it was. I was being supportive. I was helping. But then there were moments that weren't so easy to explain away. Like the night we were in the kitchen again, just the two of us. Smith had gone to bed early, exhausted from work, barely muttering a good night. I stayed up sipping tea, trying to shake the hollow feeling that had settled in my chest. Greg walked in, hair slightly damp from a shower, a plain t-shirt hanging loosely on his frame. He sat across from me at the table, and for a while, we just talked. About nothing. About everything. And I don't know when it happened, but at some point, he reached for something, maybe his phone, maybe his mug, and his fingers brushed against mine. It was barely a touch. A second. Less than a second. But my breath caught. I froze, my skin burning where his touched mine, a sensation so startling that I pulled my hand away instinctively. He did the same, a flicker of something unreadable passing through his eyes. And in that split second, we both knew. This wasn't just about advice anymore. From that moment, everything changed. I tried to pretend it hadn't happened. That the brush of his fingers against mine was nothing. That the sudden catch in my breath was just my imagination. But I knew better. And so did he. The next few days were unbearable. Every interaction felt heavier, thick with something neither of us wanted to name. Conversations were shorter, our movements careful, deliberate, like we were both walking a tightrope, terrified of tipping too far one way or the other. But the tension, it only grew. And then it happened. It was late. The house was quiet. Smith had gone out for the night, something about a work event, though I barely heard the details. It wasn't unusual. He had been spending more and more nights away, lost in his own world, his own distractions. And me? I had stopped asking. Greg was in the living room when I walked in, sprawled out on the couch, watching something on TV. I wasn't planning to stay. I was just passing through, maybe heading to bed, maybe to grab a glass of water, anything to keep my mind from going where it shouldn't. But then he looked up at me. And I stopped. I don't know what it was about that moment. Maybe it was the dim lighting, the way the soft glow of the screen flickered across his face. Maybe it was the fact that we were alone, with nothing and no one between us. Maybe it was just the weight of everything unsaid finally catching up to us. Whatever it was, it held me there. You okay? He asked, voice low, unreadable. I should have said yes. I should have turned and left the room. But instead, I took a slow step forward. I don't know, I whispered. And that was the truth. I didn't know. I didn't know what I was doing, or why my heart was pounding, or why the air between us felt like it was pulling me in. I just knew that I couldn't move. That I didn't want to move. He sat up, watching me, waiting. His expression unreadable, his body still, like he didn't want to scare me off. like he was waiting for me to decide. And I was deciding. My breath was shallow. My pulse a drumbeat in my ears. Every inch of me screamed to run, to stop, to end this before it could begin. But there was another part, quieter, but stronger. A part that was tired of being invisible. A part that wanted to feel something again. I took another step. The space between us was nothing now. Inches. A breath. A choice. His eyes locked onto mine, searching. His fingers twitched at his sides, like he wanted to reach for me, but wouldn't. Couldn't. Not until I made the first move. I swallowed, my lips parting, something I couldn't name tightening in my chest. And just as I leaned in, bang, the front door swung open. I jumped back, my pulse rocketing, my stomach lurching as Smith's voice filled the house. "Diana? You still up?" Greg stiffened. His jaw clenched. But I didn't have time to look at him, didn't have time to process what had almost happened. I turned away, forcing myself to breathe, forcing my hands to stay steady as I smoothed my shirt and stepped back, putting a safe, too safe, distance between us. "Yeah," I called back, my voice strained. I was just heading to bed. I didn't dare look at Greg as I left the room. Because if I did, I knew I wouldn't be able to ignore what I had almost done. I barely slept that night. Even after I shut the bedroom door, even after Smith climbed into bed beside me and let out that tired sigh that usually meant he was asleep within minutes, my mind kept replaying it. Every second, every detail. The way Greg had looked at me. The way I had stepped toward him. The way my body had betrayed every rational thought I tried to hold on to. I hadn't crossed the line. Not physically. But did that even matter? Because in my mind, in my heart, I had wanted it. The guilt came in waves. It burned hot in my chest, made my stomach churn, made my skin crawl. I wasn't this person. I wasn't reckless. I wasn't cruel. But what was I supposed to do with this thing that had settled inside me? With the fact that I couldn't stop thinking about him? With the fact that part of me still wanted more? I turned my back to Smith, staring at the wall, feeling the weight of it all pressing down on me. Morning came too soon, and when I finally pulled myself out of bed, exhaustion clung to me. I went through the motions, brushed my teeth, got dressed, moved through the house like a ghost. But I felt it the moment I stepped into the kitchen. Greg was already there, sitting at the table, his hands wrapped around a mug of coffee he wasn't drinking. He looked up when I walked in. And for the first time, he didn't smile. Something about that hit harder than I expected. I busied myself at the counter, pouring coffee, pretending like I wasn't hyper-aware of his every move. But I could feel the tension. It sat between us, thick, suffocating. It hadn't been there before. I forced myself to speak, to keep things normal. Morning. A beat of silence. Then, morning. Flat. Distant. I swallowed hard, stirring sugar into my coffee even though I didn't need it. Sleep okay? Yeah. You. Fine. Another silence. The kind that felt louder than words. The kind that made my stomach twist. I turned around, leaning against the counter, finally looking at him. He was staring down at his mug, fingers drumming against the side. He wasn't fidgeting like he usually did. He wasn't shifting in his seat or making little jokes to fill the quiet. He was just still. And that's when I knew. Something had changed. Greg wasn't looking at me the same way anymore. He wasn't seeking me out. He wasn't leaning in, wasn't giving me that soft, quiet attention I had come to crave without even realizing it. He was pulling away. And it hurt more than I wanted to admit. I could have left it alone. I should have left it alone. But I found myself gripping the edge of the counter, my voice coming out quieter than I meant it to. "Greg, are we okay?" He hesitated. Just for a second. Then he let out a breath, shaking his head. "I don't know." I felt my chest tighten. I forced a small, humorless laugh. "It's not like we did anything wrong." His jaw clenched. His grip on the mug tightened. And then, finally, he looked at me. "Didn't we?" The air in the room shifted. I felt my stomach drop. Because the way he said it, the way his voice cracked just slightly, The way his expression flickered between regret and something else told me everything I didn't want to hear. He wasn't just pulling away because of guilt. He was pulling away because he felt it too. I should have felt relief. I should have taken it as a sign to let go, to move past whatever had been happening between us before it spiraled any further. But all I felt was the quiet, creeping ache of something slipping through my fingers before I could even decide if I wanted to hold on to it or not. I spent the rest of the day moving through the house like a ghost. Greg was avoiding me. Not outright. He was still there, still polite, still answering when I spoke, but something between us had shifted, and there was no pretending otherwise. I caught him glancing at me once or twice, like he was trying to figure out if he should say something. But he never did. And maybe that was for the best. Because what could either of us even say? I kept replaying it. The moment. That inch of space between us. The way my breath had caught. The way I had wanted to close the distance. I had never felt something so strong and so wrong at the same time. And it scared me. Not just because of what almost happened, but because of what it said about me. I had spent so long telling myself that I was fine. That my marriage was fine. That the loneliness was just something I had to live with. But standing there, in that dimly lit living room with my heart pounding over the way Greg was looking at me, I saw the truth. Maybe I wasn't just lonely. Maybe I had been searching for something all along. I had blamed Smith for so much. For the distance. For the way we barely spoke anymore. For the way he never touched me, never looked at me the way he used to. I told myself that he was the reason I felt this way. That he was the one who had stopped trying. But maybe I had stopped trying too. When was the last time I had reached for him? When was the last time I had told him I missed him? When was the last time I had fought for the marriage instead of just waiting for him to notice how far we had drifted? I used to think that love faded slowly, like a sunset, something natural and expected. But now I realized it wasn't always like that. Sometimes love didn't fade. Sometimes you just stopped looking for it in the place you were supposed to find it. And instead, you started looking for it somewhere else. I had been looking for something, and I had found it in Greg. That was the hardest truth to face. Not just that I had almost made a mistake, but that part of me wanted to. That I had let myself get this close to a line that could never be uncrossed because it filled something in me that had been empty for too long. I didn't know what scared me more, that I had nearly ruined everything for a moment of feeling seen, or that if things had played out just a little differently, I wasn't sure if I would have stopped myself at all. Loneliness can make you do things you never thought you would. I used to believe I was the kind of person who would never cross a line. That I was strong enough, disciplined enough, moral enough to always make the right choice. But when you spend enough time feeling unseen, unheard, untouched, the lines blur. And before you know it, you're standing at the edge of something you swore you'd never even get close to. I almost made a mistake that would have changed everything. And the scariest part? In that moment, I wanted to. Not because I didn't love my husband, but because, somewhere along the way, I forgot what it felt like to be loved back. But does that excuse it? Does wanting to feel wanted justify betraying the person you vowed to stay faithful to? Does craving something that's missing in your life give you the right to take it from someone else? Or is it just another way of lying to yourself, of dressing up your own selfishness in pretty words? I still don't know the answer. But I do know this. If you don't fight for what you have, if you let the silence settle, if you let the distance grow, eventually, someone will fill that space. And once they do, it's almost impossible to pull away. Tell me, have you ever been in a situation where emotions got complicated? Where you found yourself caught between what's right and what you felt? Let me know in the comments. I want to hear your stories. And if you want more shocking, raw, real-life confessions like this one, make sure you like, share, and subscribe to Shocking Infidelity Saga. Because trust me, this is only the beginning.